Welcome to the High Agency Podcast with your host, Noah Ravoy.
Hello. To rebuild the West, we must first rebuild ourselves. For more than 100 years, femininity has been under attack by feminism. Men and women have been manipulated and told lies about what it means to be a woman, what makes women happy, and how to live as a woman with agency. My guest today, Michelle Bishop, is a woman's coach who can help women to develop their femininity. And in this conversation, men can also learn what it means to find a feminine woman. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I have never been on a podcast before, so I'm really excited. Well, I mean, I have, but not on someone else's as a guest.
Yeah, I think guesting on other people's podcasts is probably the best way to start, because you don't have to worry about the technology. You don't have to worry about, picking subjects and themes, and you can just, it's fun to be a guest sometimes. So what is femininity? That's a really huge question nowadays.
Gosh, I've been thinking about that question for, I think for an entire week. And the most basic definition of femininity that I can come up with is it's the complete opposite of masculinity, and like you said, it's a really, really broad definition, but the masculine is all about pursuit and becoming and forming and creating, and femininity is you do have those elements of it as well, but it's more in a, like you had mentioned earlier, a more receptive role. And
yes. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. So femininity, basically it's just the opposite of masculinity. And people often associate femininity with weakness. But the funny thing is when you truly embrace your feminine side, you find strength and you find power in that, which a lot of women don't see. They see only the physical weakness. They don't see the spiritual strength that you can have through it.
A lot of people recognize that strength is one of the essential characters of masculinity. And when we say that femininity is the polar opposite or mirror opposite of that, then we think, what's the opposite of strength? We immediately think weakness. But no, that is a dysfunction. Weakness is a dysfunction. When we're talking about virtues, the opposite of the strength for women is that delicateness, that ability to conform that men often don't have, sometimes to our detriment. Sometimes when we need to cooperate with other men, we find it difficult. And that ability for women to conform to situations, to be able to adapt to change, that's very, very important. Women are masters of that. And most change that women have in their life is kind of thrust upon them. You get pregnant, and now you're in this uncontrollable biological 9-month roller coaster. And it's not something you can go halfway through and say, I want to change how this turns out. I'd rather this only take 3 months, or I'd rather, I like it. I want to do this permanently. Eventually the baby comes out, your kids grow up on their schedule. And, to a large extent, women have to conform to their husbands, to their children, to the society around them. So that, the men are strong and the women are flexible.
Right.
And that really is the, without going into dysfunction, that's the healthy mirror image to the strength.
Right. And you have to find the balance between that, because when you have both of them trying to be overly feminine or both of them trying to be overly masculine, you have this, you just have this weird space where it's like things are conflicting. But when you have the feminine, you have the masculine, and they're working together in unity, it's like a symphony. It just comes together and works so beautifully.
I think it's interesting to say overly feminine or overly masculine, and that might be hard for people to understand. And I what I think about it is so if you're going to go to the gym and you want to get stronger, you don't start by lifting, 3 times your body weight on the squat. You're going to injure yourself. And everyone has a different limit. Everyone has a natural biological limit to their physical strength. And so if you're a man, if you're at a certain stage in life where you've perhaps been decades being weak and you want to start to become a stronger man, not only do you have to start on small things and work your way up, But you have to realize you have a limit to that. And I think
Yeah.
the same for women. There's a limit to how much they can flex before it starts to damage them as a person, where they start to lose their own personhood in all of that flexing. And so even though those are the masculine and feminine strengths or virtues, every virtue taken to an extreme can become vice.
Right, right. Isn't that interesting? You know, a huge theme for me this year is balance. Like, I look at everything and I'm like, if we just had more balance. And the same goes for the masculine and feminine energies, if you will, is you have to find that balance. And when you don't have that balance, it's utterly chaotic, you know. And when, like, I feel like the female energy is very chaotic and the male energy is very ordered, you know, emotionally. And when you have too much of either side, it's just, it just can't function. But when you have the two working together, it's very harmonious.
Yeah, especially when you take into consideration that all of this is existing around the concept that we need to raise future generations. So even if the individual is not going to get married and have children, they still exist in a society that is mostly structured around children. A healthy society is structured around ensuring children are protected and raised well. And when that happens, even those who don't have children play a role in that. I think we were in a group communicating about that earlier. So even those that don't have children, by cultivating their women who don't have children, cultivating their femininity, they can still be incredibly inspirational to young people growing up in society as well. And, you know, not everyone is going to choose to get married and have kids, but they can still be excellent role models, and they can still contribute something honorably to society. Historically, unwed women would either serve the gods, so go back even before Christianity, or they would help their family with the children of their aunts and their uncle, or their aunts and their sisters, or they would, or with their own siblings as well, or they would in some way serve society in a way that was honorable and where they had respect. And so this is something I think right now, it's if I'm not going to get married, why do I need to worry about my femininity? It's so much more than that. Women who pursue a masculine path, they are not taken seriously in society. Right. They are essentially, they will never be a man, and yet they also aren't being a woman either. And they're kind of a nothing, and society sees them as a nothing. We talk sometimes about sexual polarity, you know, so men, imagine it, sexuality is I say sexuality is a spectrum. It sounds like some lefty thing, but it's not that if you're in the middle, you're neither man nor woman. It's how you express yourself. And some men will express themselves as more masculine than other men. That's obvious. Well, then obviously there's a spectrum, and women on one end and men on the other. And the closer you get to being neutral, the less society notices you and the less energy you have. Look at the people that you know in life that have tons of energy, creative energy. They usually are more or less quite far to one end or the other of the spectrum. Yeah. You ever see a couple and you go, that's a gorgeous couple, man. They have this energy amongst them, about them. Yeah. They're never two people that look identical, like those old senior citizens that they end up with the same haircut and the same clothes. That's not what you're seeing. You're seeing these people with this dimorphism. One of the viewers here says, strength is attracted to beauty and vice versa. Absolutely. And what we deem as beautiful in women is essentially great health. Yeah. You know, looking after your health. And this is something I notice a lot of mothers struggle with. You know, it's not just helping young single girls to be feminine, it's mothers as well. And women who have focused a lot on their career also, sometimes they lose sight of taking care of their health. Yeah. And that has a direct impact on their femininity. Right, right. Yeah, that's really interesting that you bring up about the neutrality. Like, the closer you get to the middle line, the less productive, the less creative you are. And that's why I think it's so detrimental for people to try and abolish gender, because it's like, no, gender has a place, and you know, you are born one way
or the other, like it or not, that's the fact of it. And embracing what you are, embracing that gender that you were assigned, that you were born with, there is so much power in that. I was actually thinking about this morning. I don't know if you're familiar at all with scriptures at all. I'm not sure what your
I used to be a
orientation
minister.
is. Okay.
I used to be a minister.
Okay. So the story of Esther in the Bible is really, really fascinating because it really shows the polarity of the sexes. You have Esther. She's the beautiful, gorgeous, sought after woman who wins the king's heart with basically her looks and her sexuality. And then you have the strong king who conquers kingdoms, but his weakness is women. He's attracted to women. He's very, very masculine and strong. And Esther essentially saves her people from being utterly ground into dust by her charm and her sexuality and her femininity. And that was her strength. If she had come in and tried to lead a war like, Joan of Arc or some kind of thing like that, it would have fallen flat on its face because she had to embrace her feminine energy in order to bring about change and affect the king, who would affect the entire nation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, she used the tools that she had at her disposal. Rather than being a subpar man, she was a excellent woman. And there is something one of the viewers did bring out here with creative types, and I've seen this quite a bit. You'll notice creative people often can channel both that masculine and feminine energy, and it creates like a whirlwind of energy within them. And as a couple, you can do that too, because most people aren't going to be able to do that. Most people have very little of either energy nowadays. Unfortunately, we're a generation of exhausted people. And with a couple, you can almost get some of that creative energy. It won't be the same as, say, an artist would be. It'll express itself differently. In many cases, it expresses itself through children. And for an artist, their art might be their children, but getting for a lot of people who are grown up since, I would say, the 80s, it's really been confusing how they should be a man or how they should be a woman. And since we're talking specifically about women today, I'm curious what you think, Michelle. What is it that women can do to cultivate their femininity?
Gosh, that's another big question. And it's something that I feel like I'm still in the process of learning. But I would say first and foremost, addressing, and this, I hope this doesn't come across as shallow, but first and foremost, addressing your appearance. Like, how are you presenting yourself? Because the way you present yourself is the way, I don't like to use the word energies a lot, but the way you present yourself is the way your energies can be manifested. So if you're dressing very manly, shapeless, just big t-shirts and baggy pants, or, things like that, you are going to have a masculine energy about you. But if you start dressing, I notice that when I wear dresses, when I wear things that are very flowy and feminine, I feel more feminine. I feel, sexy and attractive, and it changes the way I think. So first and foremost, women need to stop and they need to look at how they're dressing. And that can also go to the opposite end of the spectrum in femininity, dressing provocatively and bringing that more into a, what's the word I'm looking for? A more balanced energy and femininity, because you don't want to go too overboard and just be like the seductress, and because that's very chaotic and that can get very dark very quickly. But bringing that to a more balanced manifestation of energy, for lack of a better word. And then another thing that I like to tell women is looking at their circle. Like, who is it that is influencing you? Who is it that is like, what are you consuming? What's your social circle look like? And if you're with people that are very feminist, that have a lot of the modern anti-family values, like, is that a good thing to be associating with? How is that affecting your mind? How is that affecting your actions, your words? And finding women who are like-minded, that are going to build you up and not tear you down, finding women that are going to believe in you, that are going to help you in this journey of femininity. So those are the basics that I start with, is starting with your appearance and starting with your circle of influence.
Funny enough, that's essentially where we start with men too. We say, first thing you need to do is go to the gym and start lifting weights, because for men, everything looks good on us if we're physically fit. And so the first thing we say is go lift weights. And the reason is that appearance is a signal of the inner person. We signal who we are inside by what we do outside. This is why throughout history, the clothing people wore signified their rank in society, or their position in a priesthood, or whatever it happened to be, that they were part of a gang or whatever. They'd signal that with clothing. Clothing signalizes your affiliation. And if you're dressing in a way that signals you're affiliated with feminist thinking, then it will affect your thinking, and you will attract people to you who have that kind of energy. Energy is a real thing. We used to say it's the spirit of the people. It's their spirit. It's their dominant personality cluster of traits. And even when it comes to looking after your health, this is going to start having a knock-on effect towards femininity. For a lot of people, these very, very simple things, behavioral changes, the rest starts to become obvious. If you're a man and you start exercising and getting fitter, even your political ideas start changing. No one told you, your testosterone goes up, you become a little more disagreeable, you're harder to manipulate, and suddenly you're thinking for yourself, then that works really well. And for women, there is this, I don't need no man, I'm tough, I'm strong and independent. It's hard to think like that when you're wearing a soft, flowy dress and you're in in a feminine energy and feminine element. You start to realize that none of that was actually true. And that you are a woman, and that you need to live in a society where men are protective of women. And that is, it's female desire for protection and provision that drives masculine provision of protection and provision. And when that's rejected by women on a large extent, men just stop providing that. Yeah.
It's interesting that what women fear most, their vulnerability, is actually one of their biggest strengths, because their vulnerability is what makes men want to step up and protect and provide. And when my husband and I met, he was very attracted to my feminine energy and my vulnerability, and that I was just openly feminine, and I didn't have a chip on my shoulder. I wasn't trying to prove something to him. I wasn't trying to, go and lift weights with him, or, any of that kind of stuff. I was very feminine. He was very attracted to that. And that's why he chose me. And for women that want to become more feminine, you have to embrace that vulnerability. And, and that can be hard for some women who may have been in abusive environments before, where vulnerability was seen as a weakness and taken advantage of. And that's where you have to take a step back, and you have to look at your circle and see who's in your circle. And you have to find a safe place. You have to learn to trust people. And that's where I come in as a coach, because I help women to build up that trust, and to learn when you need to put up boundaries with people, and who are the right people to be associating with, who are the people that you can trust. So that's a huge proponent of increasing your femininity.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I've noticed that women who get into, not necessarily even married yet, just even in the early stages of dating, when they have a man that actually cares about them, and they feel that protective masculine energy on them, that their femininity starts to blossom just from that. There was a young lady tweeted, I think it was today, and I answered her. She said that men, I think she's called them clumsy or weak or something. Maybe she wasn't a native English speaker, but men who aren't men who aren't masculine, weak men, make women feel more vulnerable than they even are, because they recognize their vulnerability. Oh, plus there's no one to protect me in society. And and if these men are part of their family, or if that's their father, if their father's like that, it's pretty bad too. They start to then feel afraid and feel like they must become harder and more masculine and stronger to protect themselves because no one else is going to do it. And that's a natural response for women. And there has been studies done, showing what happens in a country where they had a war and many of the men are killed, that the women respond by becoming more masculine and taking on a harder role. And they have to do that to survive. Well, we've had a war going on boys and men for almost 100 years now, either sending them off to die in world wars or the constant, search for oil or whatever it happens to be. And in the last number of years, through more or less through the lawfare, through the court systems and taking fathers away from sons. And we end up with this generations of men that don't know how to be men. And that leaves women weak and are in a weakened position. They have a harder time finding a man to protect them. And so they become more masculine. And I think the longer a woman is in that position, the harder it is to turn it around. But it is her natural instinct for women. It is part of who they are. They have an X and a Y chromosome. Sorry, that's the men. They have 2 X chromosomes, so they can become feminine. And it's more difficult if they spent many years in that defensive mode. But it is an adaptation that can be made. Yeah,
and it's basically like, like your book talks about, agencies, basically taking responsibility and taking control of your life and being responsible for yourself. And something that I like to teach women in how to relate to men is, let's take, for instance, there's a woman who's married to a man that he's a great guy. She loves him, all this. They want to make their marriage work, but he's very indecisive. He can be feminine at times. And she steps up into that role. And in an instance like that, it's like, there may be times that you will have to challenge your husband and say, I need you to step up as the man and do this. And then when he does step up, you need to back off. And you need to let him take up that role, build him up, encourage him. And some women, especially the feminist women, will view that as like, as mothering him, but it's really not. Because you are encouraging him, showing him you have this potential, you can do this. Now I'm going to step back and I'm going to let you take the lead, and it's
I would say it's inspiring. It's inspiring him. A wise woman said that women, their way that they have power over men is by inspiring them. So they inspire men to be the best man they can be. Now they can't say you must follow this path, because that's not going to inspire him. Then they are mothering him. I think the feminists see it as mothering because their version of it is essentially mothering. And they've often, most people have never seen a healthy marital relationship. They either grew up in a single parent family or they grew up with their parents fighting. And so they've never seen that healthy dynamic of how, if the man's having a tough time, the woman can inspire him. Men come home from a hard day of work, and it's not like on Twitter where everybody gets 6 figures a month for tweeting. You probably noticed that surrounded by all these people claiming 6 figures a month for tweeting. It's not like that for most men. Most men, including travel, it's like a hard 12-hour day. Sometimes 6 days a week when they're younger, because you gotta get your nest egg built and all that. They're working like crazy. They come home, they're exhausted. But if they come home to a soft feminine woman who is bubbly and happy and energetic and joyful, and some kids that are happy to see their dad come home and a home cooked meal and the house is clean and smells great, that man, his energy he gets inspired to have this second wave of energy for the day, because his work isn't done. He's got to now father the kids and he's got to be a husband to the wife. You can't do that one day a week and expect to have a good relationship. You got to do that every day. And that kind of inspiration, if it's the opposite, if he comes home to a messy house and, here's a what do you call it? I don't even know what they're called because I don't eat them. One of those TV dinners. Yeah. Here's one of those TV dinners. I'm going to put the kids to bed, go watch TV while you eat it. And, and she's in track pants and a ripped t-shirt. and hasn't bathed all day and all this, guy's gonna come home and go, I wish I was still at work.
Yes. And, to be completely honest, there's definitely those days that happens.
Yeah.
But when that's not the norm, it's like, that's the exception, it's totally acceptable, because there are days when the baby is sick, and there are days when you're just exhausted. And then, but having the majority of your days being that, and creating this, what's the word? Gosh, this castle, creating this cozy castle for your king. Ooh, I really like the alliteration. I'm gonna have to write that down for later. Creating a cozy castle for your king, and he comes home and he wants to be home, and it rejuvenates, it revives him, it inspires him, and it's so much different than him coming home and you just shout and, I wish you'd do this and I wish you'd do that, because that doesn't work.
Here's your chore list, and if you do all these chores, I will kiss you, and maybe on our anniversary you'll get laid. Maybe.
Right.
It is, here's your sticker for being a good boy. It's not treating the man like a king. That is really the right words to use. Treating them like they're a king, like they have, what is it that's different between a king and just an average man? You're treating him like he has authority, and like he has a high value to you.
Yes.
And, we both of us are Bible readers. So Sarah, she called her husband Lord, and king and Lord really is the same word. Etymologically, I can't say that word. It's basically means the same thing. It means that the highest Lord, but high Lord. And it says she said that in her heart. It doesn't mean she actually called him that. What it meant is she looked up to him as someone that she could, as someone that had value to her, and as her leader. And that encouraged him then to be a leader, of course, I would assume.
Right. And, that's funny too, because when you treat your man like a king, he is more inclined to treat you like a queen.
Yeah.
And that's what I found to be true in my life. Like, my husband absolutely spoils me. And there are some days that he will spoil me even when I don't treat him like a king. And then I come back, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Keeps burning coals on my head. And the feminism has completely destroyed that, for women, because they view, like, they don't want you to submit to a man, and they see submission, they see marriage and family and home, they see it as something very bad and very detrimental.
Yeah, it's like slavery. It's like slavery. You're chained to the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant all the time, and how you have no rights and all of this. Whereas it's far from that.
Yeah, it is so far from that, because when you treat your man like a king, he is going to be inspired to treat you like a queen. And it goes back to that whole masculine and feminine energy. When you are embodying the energy that you were born with, then that inspires the other person with their energy. And when you marry that, it's just this beautiful, like, symphony, fireworks, like whatever you want to call it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and it's one of the commenters mentioned here, feminists are wounded girls. And I think, you rarely ever have, I've dealt with lots and lots of feminists. Mostly I end up blocking them, but occasionally they want to have a somewhat honest interaction. And very, very quickly you realize that they either had no father, or they had a man who procreated them, of course, because you couldn't exist. And he was in their life, but he didn't fill the role of father. He was essentially an older brother. He was not mature. He did not give them advice and protection and safety. And because he didn't provide the actual value that men are capable of providing to her, she can't see what that value is. And then they end up becoming feminists because they understand what the woman needs to give, and they don't understand what they get back. As a man, healthy men have a very strong sense of honor. And part of that sense of honor is that we give as good as we get. And that can mean, like, we defend ourselves. It can also mean that we don't want in any group that we're in to be the one that's contributing the least in the group. We want to be the, we want to give, contribute back to whatever project we're in more than we get. That's our marriage. That can be in our work, whatever it is. Most men have that sense of honor. They don't try to free ride. And healthy men, they actually find that abhorrent. Even in their friends, they'll push their friends to be, to not be the weak link in the group. Well, in a marriage, what that means is that normally a woman invests into the marriage. She usually gets a very good rate of return. She gets a lot better back than she would investing anywhere else. Most women will not have a career. They'll have a job.
Right.
Unless they become a mother, a wife and a mother. Then they have an actual career. Otherwise, and I've seen, unfortunately, this happen to many women where they're just struggling to keep their head above water through their entire life. Whereas, that amount of struggling, at the end, they could have had a husband and children and grandchildren and been really secure, surrounded by all these people that love them. And, not everyone's going to have kids, but those that can have children, and will appeal to the vast majority of people, they need to know that can be a great investment and not be scared off of it because they're worried that it's going to be all work and no fun.
Yeah. And that's the farthest thing from the truth, and that's, people like to cite these crazy relationships that are just really abusive. And it's like, that's an abusive relationship. But this healthy relationship over here, like, there's give and take, and it's not just take, or give. Going back to what we were talking about earlier about treating him like a king and he'll treat you like a queen, like, you both have to fulfill your roles. You both have to give in order to receive, and people don't see, I think that children have gone down in value in our society. So when people see a woman choosing to stay home and choosing to raise their children, it's seen as something that's just completely, it's completely mind-blowing. They don't understand it, but like, that is her career. That's what women are hardwired to do. And like you said, not all women can have children, not all women want to have children, but women can still have that that direction, that influence in other people's lives. I've seen a lot of women who either chose not to have children or could not have children, and they worked with kids and they were really, really good, and they influenced and just loved on those kids. So being a woman, you have a lot of power and you have a lot of influence, and it's not slave labor.
Yeah. A lot of times, I said this recently, aunts are backup mothers. And you may not have any kids of your own, but, if your sisters or your brothers have children, you cultivate a good relationship with them and help to develop that relationship so that you are valued. I had an aunt, and a great aunt, actually, and she had no children. They tried, they weren't able to. And when she was in her 80s, she broke her hip, and she spent about 10 years until she was like 95 or 6, something like this, in the hospital. And someone from the extended family would visit her every couple of days. They had a routine going, and I'd just get like a message on the phone, or before that, I'd get a phone call for messages, and they'd say, "You're next Tuesday at 5 o'clock," and okay, and then I know I had to show up at Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and I go and see her, and she was a very tiny little woman. She weighed about 80 pounds. She was really small. She was super pleasant. She always was smiling, even as she got to the end where she couldn't talk. She'd always smile and hold your hand, and she was so gracious when she was alive and so loving. She was such a warm person that the whole family, we weren't doing this because I wasn't doing it because I got a phone call, because I could have like opted out of the rotation. I was doing this because we loved her, because we had this deep connection. This is my great aunt, so I hardly spent time with her compared to my actual aunts and uncles. And so developing that kind of relationship with your extended family, foster kids, whatever it happens to be, that's one way to do that. And for Some individuals, it'll be through creating other kinds of social networks. A lot of the social networks that I've seen pop up, there's a woman somewhere at the center of that social network who doesn't have kids, and she's creating kind of a family and helping young people that need advice and help and giving them some of her wisdom. And so there's always options for us out there, especially for women to get that opportunity to mother if that's their instinct, even if they can't have their own kids.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point you bring up. And before I met my husband, and obviously before I had kids, I was always drawn to childcare, teaching Sunday school, working in the nursery at church. I loved being around children, and I would ask my friends, like, can I babysit for you? Can I give you guys a break, go on a date, recharge, reconnect? I'll play with the kids. And I absolutely loved it. And it was really good for me in preparation for having my own children and being able to pour into someone else's kids and knowing I'm helping to shape this child. I care about this child, and directing that feminine energy and that creativity into that child. And that has been so helpful in being a mom, because I feel like with the experience that I gained in over 10 plus years of working with kids, I have that experience, I have that knowledge. So when I have my own children, I'm not at a loss of what to do. And true, there's always going to be a learning curve with kids, but I was very comfortable with the concept of having children by the time we were ready to have kids. And I really credit that to all the work that I did with kids in the past. So for single women that are desiring marriage and desiring family, they should be looking into ways that they can be working with children and be building up other mothers and fulfilling that aunt role, like you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, a lot of mothers have asked me, how do I help my daughter to cultivate femininity? Because they might have some femininity themselves, but they got it unconsciously, subconsciously. It just kind of happened, and they're not sure how they got where they are.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I say to them is, your daughter is going to be in school probably for a minimum of 12, 13 years, including kindergarten, more if she went to preschool, and even more if she goes to university. That's thousands of hours of learning how to do a job or a career, which she's probably going to, end up in the bottom third of income for. How much time has she spent holding children and taking care of children? And encouraging young girls from their age that they're able to look after their siblings, to look after, not all the time as slave labor, but
right.
Sometimes when it's appropriate and in amounts it's appropriate, so they don't become exhausted and dislike it because they're doing it too much. But right. in a way, especially when it's babysitting, because this way they get paid to do it and they get that kind of financial incentive. You don't want to pay your own daughter to take care of your other kids. That's not really the right dynamic. But if they're looking after a stranger's kids, of course,
right,
letting her do that. Someone has a baby, take your daughter, go to the hospital. It's COVID now, you can't do that. But when COVID's not there, she comes home from the hospital. If you can, go visit. And don't just go visit and be a weight on the new mother. Go visit and say, hey, make a casserole. We're going to take that out to our friend, and you're going to give it to her. And just had a baby, and explain to her what it is. There's a lot of fear amongst young women over it's not the mechanical part of having the baby. It's not the pain of the baby. It's not what they're afraid of. They're afraid of, will I be a good mother? This wasn't, I remember my great grandmother telling me that wasn't a question that women had 100, 120 years ago.
Yeah.
When she was little, they didn't have that question, because they literally, there was a kid coming every 2 years in the family, and that's from one mother. And then there would be 12 or 13 siblings in the family, which meant that there were every couple of months there was a new baby, and all the girls had to pitch in and help with everything: housework, baby work, all of that stuff. When they weren't at school, they were looking after something in the family, and they said it was just natural. It was the easiest thing in the world. You know, they'd done everything from help the goats and cows give birth to actually watch their mother give birth to most of their younger siblings or their aunt or whatever. Helped in it since you know, they were in an isolated area and they didn't even have midwives. They ended up mostly doing that within the family, and so it wasn't scary to them. And nowadays we give tons and tons of training to women all about how they can work. And essentially, we even got rid of the home ec class where they at least learned how to do the basics of looking after a home, and now they get nothing. And that's unfair. If you want grandkids, train your daughters to not be afraid of being a mother. It's the being a mother part that they're scared of. Will I do a good job? And I actually think that fear is a positive thing. The sense that the girl says, will I be good at this? It means that she has actual genuine care and concern about it.
Right.
But it needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it builds up in her mind and it becomes a blockage to her pursuing that life.
Right.
It's easy to go to university. You know, you pick an easy subject like most women do. You know, go study sociology or something studies that's pretty easy. And that's a whole lot easier than go something you don't know anything about. It's the unknown that scares women. And, you know, when it comes to cultivating masculinity, it's all about the things that make you a good protector and provider of society, of other men, women, and children. The compatible and opposite to that is whatever makes you good at inspiring men and taking care of children and also the elderly. And so just by doing those things, you start to develop the characteristics of femininity.
Right. And, you know, something that I want to touch back on too, that you had mentioned, you talked about when someone has a baby, you make a casserole, you take your daughter, you say, you give the casserole to the woman, like you be part of this. And that's another thing about femininity. It's not just the way you look. It's not just holding babies all the time. It's also just being a helper to people. And it doesn't mean that you are a helper to every single person that you see, because I have been there and it's the worst thing in the world. You know, you're overstretching yourself. You don't have boundaries. But knowing when to help and how to help. I think that's a huge aspect of what it is, what it means to be feminine. And something else that I really love to encourage young women to do that are wanting to increase their femininity is to just look around and see who needs help. You know, does your neighbor need something? You know, do a grocery run for them. Is there a young mother in your social group that's really struggling, really tired? You know, offer to hold her baby so she can take a nap. And just look for ways to be helpful and to be encouraging and just spreading community. I feel like we're hardwired to create community around us. And like you had said earlier, at the center of every circle, there's usually a woman. And that's something that women, we're naturally good at. We love to talk. We love to be with other people. We're very social creatures, not to say that men aren't, but women are more inclined towards that. And embracing that and looking for ways to encourage and help and build community, that's another great way to continue building that femininity.
I remember when I first started dating my wife, before we were married, we walked around her village or town, I guess, about 100,000 people. But the old part of the town where there's 20, 30,000 people living, it's all walkable. In fact, it's almost impossible to drive. It's old, 200-year-old roads, pre-car roads. So they're very narrow. And as we're walking along, everyone that would walk by us would stop. They'd see us holding hands. They'd stop. They'd look and they'd go, you're dating this guy? They would check me out and see if they all knew her. They all knew her. She knew them. She knew who they were related to. She knew the old people, what they were sick with. She knew whatever it happened to be that was, she'd say, how's your kid doing? She knew who their kids' names were, how old they were, all of this stuff. And this is all in her head. She knew all of this. She knew everything that was happening around her area, and in several hundred people that would walk up to us while we were walking out and stop us and say that basically that they loved her, and I better not do anything. I better not break her heart, or they're gonna little old ladies threatening me with their canes, and every shop we go into, everybody knew her. We go into a shop and they're like, no, and they'd be so super friendly with her, and she friendly with them. Next customer would come, it's just like exchange of goods, because she had this interest in other people, and she treated everybody with kindness and with grace and with respect. And she'd been doing that all of her life. She lived in that same little walkable village all her life. And there you walk around, so you constantly see people, and it's pretty normal to just stop in the street and talk. And so she had, over a couple of decades, built up this reputation that everyone, she'd helped almost everyone at some point with something. And so she was sitting in the middle of all this love and attention and protection. And a lot of times women will say, how do I meet a good man? Well, she met me through friends, because people knew her and knew me. We ended up in the same place. Be that kind of person that is so gracious, is so kind to others, that everyone wants you around, and you start getting invited to everything. You start being pulled over into everyone's social circle because you add value to it. And pretty soon, your reputation will attract the right kind of men to you as well. And everyone come up to me, and the moment they realized I liked her, and starts to tell me, oh yeah, she's like this and she's like that, and oh yeah, she's a good girl, and blah blah blah, and all, basically they gave the recommendation of her right off the bat. And I thought I'd never had this happen before with a girl I met, and all of the girls or women that I had dated, they were towards that level, but never at that extreme where they had such a network built up. And so I think that had a lot to do with why I was interested in her, because it indicated things about her personality that were very attractive, and that would make her an excellent wife. And even today, like, she's the manager of the social calendar. I will tell her, I want to hang out with, I want us to go and spend time with this other family. And can you go arrange it with the wife? And she'll go, and the wives will arrange it. And us guys will get together, and we're like, we'll phone. Oh yeah, we're getting together on Thursday, right? Yeah. The women have it all set up, and off we go for a couple's date or whatever it happens to be. And it's, I mean, someone has a birthday, someone has an anniversary, whatever it is. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. She knows all about that, and she sticks a card in front of my face and says, "Sign this card for so-and-so." And she handles all of that. But she was doing that before we were married in her own social circle. And this is why people remembered her. And, if you want to meet men, you must be out in the world in a very positive way.
Yes, that's something that I really strongly believe in, because there are some people, I would go so far as to say cults, some very conservative cults that believe that women should not be in the world in any kind of way. They should stay home. They shouldn't even have jobs. They shouldn't go to school. And I feel like that may have worked 100 years ago, but in today's society, like, you have to get out, and you have to, in a way, you have to provide for yourself. And I met my husband because I was going to school, and because I was putting myself out there. I had jobs in childcare. I had jobs that complemented my personality, complemented my energy, so it would continue to build me up. It was a good place to be in, and I had a good social circle. And because I had a good social circle, and I was out there, and I had experience, my husband was attracted to me. And here we are 3 years later, 2 kids later. So yeah, you have to put yourself out there, and you have to not be afraid to be out there. And when I say putting yourself out there, it's not like you have to be the funniest one or the prettiest one in the room. It's just show up. Just show up. Find circles that are good, that are trustworthy, build that community, be the kind of person that you want to attract, and that person will come to you.
Absolutely. It worked 100 years ago because our parents and grandparents, our ancestors, or not our ancestors, are the elders of the community, organized the social events, organized social circle. You know, if you live in the South, they had all these things. The coming out ceremony. So their girls were, I think, 14 or 16. There was a dance, and there was constantly something going on. You know, to mark the seasons, to mark the changes, to mark saints' days, whatever it happened to be. And you didn't need to put a lot of thought into it. You just went along with whatever your community's social program was, and you would meet someone, and you'd get, you know, basically your issue was picking from the people you met, not an issue of, will I ever meet anyone? We can live in a big city nowadays and meet no one, because we don't really meet people. We pass them in the street. I'm this weird guy who says hello to people when they pass me in the street, unless there's like 100 of them at once. But I say hello. And because I do that all the time in my neighborhood, and because I'm, you know, I have a big beard now, so especially, I stick out a little bit. And I'm not Portuguese. I live in Portugal. I'm not Portuguese. And so what ends up happening is people notice me and recognize me. So I always get a nice hello back, and I get this little light and goes on in their eyes. Oh yeah, I've seen that guy before, and you know, they'll wave to me. But it's we're just not in a situation anymore where we're in total chaos. We don't have a nice, neat, organized social circle where we have church with everyone in the community going. And if you don't, you're the outcast, and you wouldn't want to marry them anyway. And where there's social events organized every couple of weeks, and where essentially everyone basically agrees what it means to be married. And so it's not that hard. You know, all the women are more or less the same, and all the guys are more or less the same. Right. When you have that kind of homogenous culture, we don't have homogeneity anymore, and we don't have unity, and we don't have any kind of structure anymore. And those that do, they tend to get married young, and they get a lot of support from their community. A lot of my ancestors got married in their teen years because the family would kick in, and you get married, you get a house. Right. You know, you imagine if you were married and you have a house mortgage free, and that's your wedding gift from your family, everyone kicks in and gets you a house, actually builds you a house on family property. Okay. So this was a very different situation than we're facing today. It is unfortunate, but we're often more on our own now than were in the past. Right. And we need to counter that by being active and demonstrating our agency, being proactive, passive, and looking. God makes it rain, hail, snow. Sometimes it rains fishes and frogs, apparently. It does not rain men, ever.
Contrary to the song.
Contrary to the song, it doesn't rain men. If you want a man and you want God to provide one for you, you got to go where the men are so he can provide it. And I think this holds back a lot of young Christian ladies. They hide their passivity behind a saying that God will provide for me. Yes. It's an excuse for passivity. It's not in the Bible. It is not a Christian belief. It is an excuse for passivity. And getting over those excuses is going to get you a lot farther in life.
For sure. And you know, that's another thing why I love to coach young women, is because I used to be there. I was like the quintessential Christian young woman, single, wanting to get married, but I would hide behind that passive. I cannot speak this morning. I was very passive, and I was afraid to put myself out there to make decisions for myself, because I thought that was going to be contrary to God's will. And basically I was just afraid, and I didn't know how to, I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust that I was reliable, that I was responsible. And I thought, well, I'll just sit and I'll wait for God to bring someone. And it created this crisis within me, you know, as a young 21-year-old. And I was like, this just doesn't settle well with my spirit. Like, I'm unhappy. I see my friends getting in relationships and getting married, and they're happy. What is it that they have that I don't have? And I really started to look hard at myself and see what it was that I was lacking. And I realized that it was that mindset of, I'm going to wait on God, which is basically like, I'm just going to be passive and I'm not going to do anything. But God doesn't call us to wait. He wants us to go out, and he wants us to go do things. And part of that for me was getting comfortable talking to guys and not being afraid of talking to guys and thinking that I was just getting over that fear of talking to guys and realizing the worth that I had and dressing more feminine and embodying the feminine energy that God had given me. And all of those things combined led to me eventually finding my husband. And honestly, it wasn't even that long before I made the decision to start being more feminine and putting myself out there. And I would say within a year, I met my husband. So it's not impossible. It is not impossible at all. And it really does require being intentional because, like you said, we don't have that community anymore of like the families, they come together. Like the family unit is under attack. And the family unit today is broken. And it's up to us to rebuild that. And we have to be that family unit for people that may not necessarily have that. So people like you and people like me, we coach so that we can provide that structure and that wisdom that those people may not necessarily have in their lives.
Absolutely. I'm going to put a link to where they can. I didn't put it yet in the comments, but it's going to be in the comments below the video, where people can find you, and I'll put that below the Periscope video as well.
Awesome.
The last question that we have today is: how do you stay in your femininity when raising young boys who are very hierarchy oriented without the presence of a father? This is a great question.
Yeah. So I've actually thought about that myself because I have two boys and they're very young, and I have thought before, like, what would ever happen if my husband passed away? Like, how would I raise them to be masculine men? And I think the answer to that is finding men in your circle, in your community, that can act as a father to those boys, and approaching someone and being like, hey, would you mind setting up like a fishing trip for your boys, or getting them involved in those kind of things, and finding good, strong, manly, godly men that are going to pour into your sons and help to guide them, even though your own father may not be there.
And likewise, I always say this to young men that are, where do I meet women? And I give them very similar advice with your social circle, but I say, go volunteer to help out with the fatherless boys. Go start organizing events, hiking trips, fishing, whatever it happens to be. Start organizing things with them, because the kind of women they're looking for a woman to start a family with. She's going to look at a man that can deal with children and can lead children and say, that could be the father of my children.
Yeah.
That's a lot more powerful than, do you want kids? Oh yeah, I want a bunch of kids. Okay, you said it, but what proof do I have that you can even handle children?
Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah, there are men that can't handle kids. They just can't handle children. They don't know what to do with kids. And I think with time and effort, they can learn. But it's a lot easier for women to filter the men that are going to have an easier time with that by seeing, is this young man feel compelled, and is he taking a lead in the social circles by helping out the single mothers and looking after their kids? And so I think that's really, I absolutely agree with your advice there, is to get men in the community to do that. And the big thing with hierarchical boys is that you don't need to punish children that want to be in a hierarchy. You simply need to establish a hierarchical head or a leader of them, and they seek to follow his guidance. And so it creates a very peaceful situation where he can lead them, and the kids aren't going to be constantly rebelling against that. If children are constantly rebelling, as parents, we can't keep up with that. It's impossible. Eventually, they're going to tire us out, because there's many of them and few of us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for joining me today. And we're going to wrap up now. This has been a great interview. And if anyone has any more questions or would like to know how to become more feminine, look in the comments that are below this video, and there will be a link to Michelle's website where you can book a coaching session. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you for watching our video, and I hope it inspired you to take action in your life. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video to get more agency building content. The real secret sauce is in our newsletter. Click on the link in the video description below to sign up. I promise I won't flood your inbox, and anything that we do send you will be of high value.